All right. So you found the monographs and the herb journals. Herb journals are there for if you want to record your responses to what we're doing today. It's kind of an idea as to what that looks like to collect that information, but also that collecting that information looks different to different people. So that's just one way to do it. But some people like to fill in forms. I really like to fill in forms. That makes me feel like comfortable. And some people like to just feel them or draw pictures or
Was that in the email?
do a dance. No, it's right back there.
I actually don't have a pen.
Oh, we have pens right up there.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So, so that's good morning. So that is a way to gather the information if you want to. Most of the information that I'm going to go over is in the monograph, but it's also really important for you to kind of experience the plants, and irrespective of what the monograph says or what the book say or what I say, experience what your body feels and says about it. And that's one of the reasons why we have the journals. It's also really beneficial in a larger group like this to see how other bodies respond, and understanding that not all bodies are going to have the same response to a plant is really, really valuable, and allows you to kind of honor how your body feels and what your body is telling you. Your body is collecting information from this plant, and what you feel is what you feel, and what you feel is really good and important. But sometimes you'll read that a plant is like cooling, and you're like, okay, don't even know what cooling means, but to me this plant feels warming, right? This feels very, very warming. Like, great, that plant feels warming and nourishing to you. What does that mean? We can go into that. It might be a different warming than like ginger or cayenne would be, but it's no less valuable. It's just different. And so sometimes reading information, especially if you're relatively new to Western herbalism, this is true for Ayurvedic. It's true for any group that you kind of go into that has language that is specific to it. Sometimes it's hard to interpret that language, but I just want you to encourage you to feel what you feel. Develop a relationship with the plant. It's really beneficial when you're first becoming introduced to a plant to taste it by itself. Just by itself. If you can, nibble on some of the leaf, right? Be in relationship with that plant and write it down. Write down your experience so you know this is how this plant feels. This is how my body responds to this plant. And over time, you do that, every week you do a different plant. And over time, you can really amass a very deep, complex, and specific to you materia medica of plants that you can work with in a wide range of different things. So, good morning, Rosa. Good morning, Teresa. Hi, Josie. Let's see. So today we are working with plantain. Now, there's a fruit called plantain, right? So this isn't plantain the fruit, this is plantain the plant. And therein lies one thing that you want to be aware of, is that the common names of plants can be varied, right? A plant can have many, many, many different common names. So this plant is also known as ribwort. And you know what? I'm going to pass around. Number one, I want to show you folks online. This one I pulled out of. It was in a planter with my hawthorn tree, and so they've been being buddies. But it's just a really, really beautiful plantain. We have a lot of plantain out there, so I encourage you, after you meet this plant today, go out and identify it outside. Take one of the leaves and pass it along, so you all can kind of have a leaf to play with as we're doing this. So ribwort is one of the other names for it. Wort means plant, right? That suffix means plant. So this is the rib plant. And you can sort of see that the venation, the veins along the backside are very, very pronounced. They look like ribs, in fact. And they're kind of hard to pull, right? They're very, very, very strong. Keep one to show you online. And you have this growing in your neighborhood. Don't care where you are, you have this growing in your neighborhood. You see those parallel veins are one of the indicators of this plant. So ribwort is another common name. Waybread is a common name in Anglo-Saxon terms. This was one of the top 10 sacred herbs in traditional Anglo-Saxon herbalism traditionally, but it has a place in the herbal traditions of almost every country because it is a plant that is circumglobal, grows all over the globe in different species. So we have the common names that can be different, and then we have the Latin names. And what I always want to be sure, if you're not really sure what plant you're looking for, if you know the Latin name, then you're assured of not getting like dried plantain as the fruit, right? Because someone said you want a plantain, they're going to give you plantain. But if we go to the botanical name, Plantago, and I'm going to write spa, and that means that this is the genus name. And so there's a genus and then a species. It's like first name, last name, right? And so sometimes it's a very specific species that has to be used. And sometimes it's like, nope, anyone within the Plantago family, anyone within the Plantago genus is going to be beneficial. And so we're going to say that. So this one is Plantago major because it has these big broad leaves, also known as broadleaf plantain. And this is the one that you're likely to see. And again, it is growing in your neighborhood. It's growing somewhere really close by you because it grows everywhere. It is one of our most common weeds. So Plantago species. And then the family is the plantain family, the Plantaginaceae family. So that just means that there's a whole bunch of other cousins of this plant that all kind of hang out together botanically. But as long as it grows in a basal rosette like this, so see how it grows, each leaf is coming out of the ground, right? There's not a central stem where it's coming up and the leaves are coming out of it. Each leaf is coming out of the ground. That's called a basal because it grows out of the base rosette. There's the rose petals like that. So basal rosettes, and then one flower stalk coming up with one flower inflorescence on it, right? So there's a number of different flowers, but they're each on their own stalk. Again, you don't see those multiple stalks. And then you look at the back and you see that parallel venation, those veins on the back, those ribs. If they're parallel like that, what you have is plantain. The other common one that we see here is lance-leaved, and so it's narrow. It's not the broad one, it's narrow. That one we see up higher, in higher elevations in our mountains here. All right, so that's the plant that we are working with, Plantago. And this comes from the Latin root planta, which means the sole of the foot. Right, so if we think of like plantar fasciitis, inflammation, it's called plantar. Plantar is things having to do with the foot. Which brings up one of the other common names for it is white man's footprint, because it's said that where colonization comes in, where people come in and they're compressing the ground or ripping out all of the native plants, and they're planting things and stomping around and just kind of making a mess of things. That's the type of environment that plantain really likes. It likes that compressed, dense, clayey, overworked, nutrient-poor soil. So it's a very, very common weed. And then if you look at the seeds, you pass this around again and you look at the seeds. So this is the seed head. Where do you get the information you give them? Oh, Rosa, if I don't know how to attach links to this, but it's a monograph that I give to my students. Good morning, eyes open. You have the narrow leaf. Yeah. So the narrow leaf, broadleaf, they're very, very similar in action. So this applies to the lanceolata, the broadleaf as well. So this seed head contains some different medicine. This one, if you pull it, you'll see why it's such a common weed. Is look at all those seeds on one of the stems. Those are all seeds.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So many seeds. Each one of them is going to grow a plant, and you can see again along our walkway there how successful it is. I don't know if you can see seeds. Now, the other part of that I want to show you is the hulls, right? So the seed are the dark area, the hulls, so these ones right here. Plantain hulls in a different species, but pretty much the same as this. There's another plantain called Plantago ovato, which is also known as psyllium. Psyllium husks, which is sold as a Metamucil, is one of the primary manufacturers of or marketers of psyllium husk. They use the hulls, the external husk of plantain, basically exactly what I'm holding in my hands, as one of the primary fibers used for, colon cleansing, for helping to regulate bowel function. So you can just go and grab a seed head from this plant and take this and mix it in some water and drink it down, and you have your homegrown psyllium. All right, but we're going to talk, and the tea that we've made is from the leaf. So you're going to try the leaf. It's dried leaf. We're not using the fresh leaf. Fresh leaf tea is very nice, but this is dried, beautiful, grown at Oshala Farms up in Oregon, one of our favorite providers. So I've made this tea. This steeped for about half an hour. And so I want you to take this tea and just kind of breathe in the steam. And what you're doing is you're testing for, how does the steam make your sinuses feel when you breathe it in? How does it make your lungs feel when you breathe it in? It might just be that it feels like I'm breathing in steam. That's good information to know, right? You're going into relationship with that steam. Steam is medicine, so you're going to feel a difference in your lungs and in your sinuses if you breathe this in, because you're breathing in steam. But do you feel like there's much of the plant itself in that steam, or maybe the plant likes to be more in the tea itself? What's your just immediate kind of feeling about that? Or is it both?
It smells like echinacea to me.
It smells like echinacea to you.
Yeah.
Kind of smells like senna also.
Like what?
Senna.
Oh, senna, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What I don't smell a lot of is I don't smell like volatile oils. I don't smell what I would call aromatics, things like mint and lavender and thyme and peppermint, right? So that's kind of a whole class of chemistry of plants that it's important to know if a plant has that. If that plant has that, then you're going to work with it as an aromatic, and if not, you're not. It's just one of the ways we can start to categorize plants as we're working with them. So do you think that this plant is aromatic? No, there's definitely a smell.
Yeah, it smells really nice, but it's gentle.
But it's gentle, yeah. Yeah. So there might be medicine from this steam, but if so, it's going to be pretty mild, right? We don't really sense a whole lot from that steam. So then take it into your mouth, and what I want you to do is kind of compare how the steam felt to how the tea feels in your mouth, bringing it into your body and kind of holding it in those tissues. Our mouth has a lot of awareness and vigilance. It's where things come into our body. And so if we hold things there and just kind of experience them, we can get a lot of information. So what do you think about that?
To me, it feels kind of cooling.
Feels cooling?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's mild.
It's mild.
Yeah. I'm not getting like an overflow of flavor.
Right. Right. Yeah, definitely not bitter. Right? We don't taste bitter compounds, and bitter compounds can trick you. Bitter compounds are not aromatic. They will not show up in any kind of smell sensory input. So you can smell something, think, this smells quite nice. This smells just kind of lovely and gentle. And then you take a sip of it and it smacks you across the face because bitter compounds are really large and complex and can't be carried by steam, can't be carried in the air. So we don't sense those by taste. So this plant, there's not a lot of bitterness to this. It's a very gentle plant.
The flavor seems to match the scent.
And the flavor matches the scent. Yeah, there's no surprises with this plant. Yeah. There are totally surprises with this plant. But yeah, not to the senses. So where do you feel it lands? We can put plants on a spectrum from on this side being food, right? This is a carrot, right? And over here we have poison, right? So medicines are kind of along this spectrum somewhere. Foods are along this spectrum. Herbs are along the spectrum. Water is along the spectrum. Everything kind of exists along the spectrum of, is it just kind of deeply nourishing? Is it really strong medicine, right? Something deeply nourishing, we'd probably want to take every single day. This would be something we would feel safe and supported and taking every day. Strong medicine, maybe we want to leave it alone completely. Maybe we only want to use it occasionally, right? Where does this feel like it lands to you?
Like mid-range.
Mid-range?
Feels like more on this side.
Yeah,
the
very
fruit
nourishing.
side.
Feels more, nourishing. Yeah. Cool. All right. So there's a spectrum also that we look at, which is the fluid spectrum. Does this plant feel like it brings moisture into your body, or does it dry your body out? And this can be a little bit confusing, right? So we have the tissues of our mouth, right? So there's something going on with the tissues of your mouth right now. And that might be different than what's going on in your body itself. And this is something that sometimes you have to tell yourself over a period of time. What does it feel like in terms of where fluids are in your body right now?
Definitely made me like salivate.
Made you salivate.
Feels moisturizing.
Yeah.
I feel like my tongue got a little dry.
Uh-huh.
It feels coating.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a softness in the mouth.
Right.
Same.
Yeah. So we had a moistening and then a drying and a coating. And it does all of that. And so what you're responding to is kind of what you're paying attention to, but it is, that's one of the beauties of the chemistry of plantain, is that plantain is a plant that's tonifying to the tissues. It strengthens the tissues, right? We use plantain topically or internally when our body isn't really good at tissue integrity and strength, right? It's not doing a good job at making stuff healthy. Plantain is one of our primary first aid plants. And so we're generally going to use it if we have a wound, whether that wound is on the skin or if it's in our mouth for oral care or anywhere through the gastrointestinal tract. And you can feel that in the mouth. You can feel that combination of that astringency, that tightening, right? So that tightening, that shows that there's chemistry of the plant that is strengthening tissues, that's tightening tissues. It's called an astringent action, and that means it's just making those tissues more solid. It's less likely to allow fluids to move through the tissues. It's less likely to be inflamed. It's less likely to allow any pathogens, any bacteria or viruses to come in. It's kind of closing the gates, right? So if you have weak tissues, you have a wound that won't heal, or you have a rash that just keeps on staying red and inflamed and all of that, and it doesn't stop, we use something like plantain to help to stop that, to strengthen it, to shut all of that down, to cool the redness and the heat and the inflammation, because it is a cooling plant. Absolutely. You spoke to kind of that energetic quality. It definitely isn't something that is pungent. It's not spicy, right? This is not a spicy plant. It's not moving stuff in that way. This is a plant to kind of cool down spiciness in the body when the body is too spicy. So, and it's going to work directly on the tissues that it comes in contact with. So we can use it on wounds, but we can also use it again all throughout the gastrointestinal tract. It's cooling that inflammation and it's reducing that redness and all of that. At the same time, you said that it was kind of thick and smooth. So it also has the polysaccharides, the long chains of sugars that we find in mucilaginous plants, in plants like marshmallow root and slippery elm and flax seeds and chia seeds, right? And psyllium seeds, right? So plants like to produce these long chains of sugars that are like little sponges that swell up and hold and absorb water. And so they can kind of deliver layers of water to tissues that need it. Aloe vera is another one that does this, right? That's slime, right? So plants, certain plants produce these long chains of sugars called polysaccharides that hold moisture and will deliver moisture into the body, and they can be really helpful for bodies that tend to not hold water really well. For tissues that don't hold water really well, or hold bodies that don't hold water really. Some people, like, they drink water and they pee it right out. Drink it in, pee it out, drink it in, pee it out. Meanwhile, your eyes are dry and your sinuses are dry and your skin is dry and everything is dry, right? So, so plants that have that thickness, that have that body, sometimes it's a slime, like the aloe vera and the mucilage, but sometimes it's just that thickness, that body. But that is, and sometimes it's a starchiness, right? Kind of a sweet starchiness, like oat straw, if you've ever had oat straw. So whenever you kind of taste that and feel that, you know that that is a plant that's bringing moisture into the body. So this is a plant that is bringing moisture into the body. It's helping the body to hold moisture. And at the same time, it's stabilizing the tissues underneath that. And that's a really nice tissue state. If we think of the oral mucosa, right? The mucous membranes of the mouth, or any of the mucous membranes of the body. The most healthy state for those mucous membranes to be is nice and tight and firm, and then a layer of slime, a layer of juiciness over that, right? It needs both of those, you know, constricted, astringent, and moist, that combination. And that's what plantain has. We don't often see that combination in herbs. Usually they're either really, really astringent and drying, or they're really, really moistening and slimy. But this is a perfect combination. And so it kind of shows us it's a perfect combination for wound healing of any sort. And it's particularly beneficial. It is isopen, it's at $10. What was I going to say? I don't remember what I was going to say. So it is one of our primary first aid plants. So I want you to, as you drink some more, give you some more tea. And if you don't want it, you can say no, thank you. But if you're introducing yourself to plantain, you want to introduce yourself. All right, and I'm going to leave that there. And y'all fill up your cups as you like. All right. So take another sip. Now, if you pay attention to that kind of, that combination of that slime and drying, you can feel that astringent effect, right? And also that thickness over it. Yeah, it's a nice one. It is best in a water extract. This is a plant that really likes water. You can make it into an oil. You can fuse it into oil, and a lot of people do for skin healing. But it's really best in water. The chemistry of the plant just particularly likes water. So let's look at some of the other chemistry of the plant. So we've already talked about a bunch of plant chemistry. I haven't snuck it in. But we have the mucilage, right? Those are the long chains of sugars. Mucilage, the same root as mucus, right? Now, which I also want to talk about, we have a tendency in our culture to think evil thoughts about mucus. Right? Mucus is gross. Mucus is a bad. Mucus is a presentation of imbalance in the body. And we want to rethink that, because mucus is really important. It's one of the critical parts of our immune system. We love mucus when it is healthy. but we should have a layer of slime over our sinuses. We should have a layer of slime over all of our slimy tissues. Our body really loves long chains of sugar. Those are a really, really important thing. So sometimes we have a tendency to try to dry things up that we feel like, if we are blowing our nose, or we have, we just feel like there's just a lot of drippiness and juiciness. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes that's really beneficial. When you have a cold or a flu and your nose is producing all that mucus, it's doing that again as a first line of defense for your immune system to bathe those tissues with very strong immunoglobulins, antibodies. So it's kind of trying to do its job of fighting infection. Then we're going in and we're drying things up. If you want to dry things up, but also keep them juicy, plantain is one of the plants that you can use, because also sometimes you don't want to be drippy, right? You're like, yes, okay, I honor my mucus, whatever, but also I kind of want to just have regular healthy tissues, right? So plantain is one of the plants that you can use for that. So mucilage, and then it has a lot of flavonoids, but it also has compounds called flavones. There's a lot of really cool research on 3 primary chemicals that we find in plantain. This is what makes plantain kind of through the roof for me, is because there's a lot of plants that have mucilage, right? There's a lot of plants that have tannins. You can find those everywhere. But there are 3 flavones in plantain. One is called apigenin, and one is called luteolin, and one is called bicolin. These compounds are responsible for a lot of the anti-inflammatory and antioxidant tissue stabilizing effects that plantain has. The reason why plantain is one of the go-to plants that we use for first aid, one of the reasons why you want to know about this as a weed, is because if you're outside in nature itself and you get a wound, you get a bug bite or a bee sting. This is a specific for bee stings. And so you grab a leaf and you smush it up, you break it up until you get a juicy pile of pulp. It's got a lot of moisture in it. So you're going to just keep on breaking it up until you get green juice coming out of it. Then you're going to apply that directly to the bug bite or bee sting or rash or whatever. And that is going to help the pain, the inflammation, the redness, swelling go away really quickly. It is phenomenal.
Would you recommend breaking up as opposed to chewing?
I recommend breaking up because the human mouth is a filthy place. It is. And if you have a wound, right, you have tissue that's kind of maybe not in its happy place right now. I feel like putting those organisms in there might not be helpful. It sure is handy to do so, right? Our teeth are made for crushing fibers, and so it's a really good tool. But other people love spit poultices. That's what it's called, spit poultice. Chew it up and spit it onto the tissue. So do what you feel called for. So poultice right on the skin, it's going to be really, really beneficial. There are compounds that are only available in the fresh plant. As soon as it dries up, they're not there. Dried plant, I'm not saying that dried plantain isn't good for you. It is. There's a lot of, the chemistry of plants are complex, but there is one compound that is found in fresh that makes it really, really beneficial for wound care, that makes it really, really nice to be able to identify it as a weed, go looking for it, and just be able to kind of grab that. It's magical to, if you have a kid around you and they get a bee sting, to go up and grab a plant and mush it up and apply it to them and have them, they totally stop crying. They're just fascinated by what you're doing. It's really, really cool. So one of the other things that you want to do, and so you can look at the leaf in front of you for this, if you tear off one part of the leaf, right? Tear off one little piece. If you want more leaves to take home as a whole leaf, you can take that, but I just want to show you. So you have one part of the leaf, you have the whole leaf. Now, if you pull the ribs that are sticking out, those white ribs, they will come out as little strings. They're very, very, very strong, extremely strong. You have to get a good leaf. There we go. So you can sort of see them there. So you can just pull those and you get these big threads, very strong threads. So if you want to make a first aid bandage for someone who's been injured, you take one piece of the leaf and you smush it up. You take another piece of the leaf, lay that on, and say it's on a finger, right? You lay that on the finger and you take the other part of the leaf and you wrap it. Here's your bandage. And then you really do need a couple of people for this. You can take the threads and you can tie it on.
Nice.
You can tie it on and make your little homemade bandage, plantain bandage, using just a leaf of plantain. And again, people are fascinated by that. It works really, really well. And you stopped a kid or any person from having a miserable experience with the bee sting, because bee stings hurt and bug bites hurt. But plantain is really beneficial for fighting that. Okay, so back to these flavones. There's two really amazing things that they tend to do that make plantain particularly beneficial. And one of them is that they are biofilm busters. So biofilms are structural compounds made from multiple different bacteria and yeast and viruses. Multiple organisms come together to create biofilms that live everywhere. They live in our body and on our body and all over everywhere. And they are the cause of a lot of antibiotic and resistance, basically resistance of pathogens to things to treat them, because these biofilm structures that these organisms produce are covered by a layer of mucilage that they produce, this thick layer of mucus that they cover that makes things like bleach bounce off of them and antibiotics bounce off of them. They're all covered under there. They've created this little condominium of organisms and they're protected. So these are biofilms. It's a really important part of infectious medicine these days, particularly as we come to the end of the age of antibiotics, because antibiotics aren't working anymore. And they are desperately trying to look for antibiotics that are new and effective, and they're not working anymore. And many people in infectious medicine are admitting that we don't have antibiotics, that the strongest ones just aren't effective anymore. Part of the reason is because they develop biofilms with other organisms, and the other reason is because bacteria and other organisms have compounds, structures in their body called efflux pumps. An efflux pump is also sometimes called an MDR pump, and that stands for multiple drug resistance. Multiple drug resistance. This is the reason that, beyond biofilms, this is the reason that bacteria become antibiotic resistant. It's also the reason why cancer cells become resistant to chemotherapy, because organisms and cancer cells have these specialized cells that are efflux pumps that when they detect a poisonous substance in the cell, they pump it out. They say, wow, really don't like that antibiotic that you just took. That could kill me. Thankfully, I've got this pump and I'm just going to pump it right out of my cell, and it's not going to affect me, right? It's become antibiotic resistant due to these activation of the efflux pumps.
Can you say what the MDR acronym is?
Multiple drug resistance. Yes. So the drug resistance is largely due to these. These compounds reverse efflux pump activity. So if you take plantain at the same time as you take an antibiotic or a chemotherapy agent, it's going to make them work better, because it's stopping the drug resistance pump that those cells have that make the antibiotics, that make the medicine less effective. It's a remarkable thing. Bicolin is the primary compound associated with that, and that comes from, the name of that comes from a Chinese herb called Baikal skullcap. Baikal skullcap is another source of bicolin. So plantain and Baikal skullcap are both used for for efflux pump inhibition, it's a cool thing. So, but the biofilm busting, the fact that the plantain can break down those biofilms, right? So if you combine plantain by itself, it's not very antimicrobial. It is when it's fresh. When it's fresh, there's a compound related to apigenin that's available here. And so if you need to kill something, the fresh plantain is going to do it for you. But when you have dried plantain, that compound is no longer there. And so you don't have really strong antimicrobial effects from plantain. That's not its strongest medicine. But it's going to make any herbs that you take that are antimicrobial more effective. So we always want to combine plantain with that. Plantain is also very, very effective for oral care because tooth plaque is a biofilm. So plantain, if you make any oral care products, they should always have plantain in them. But these compounds are largely soluble in water and they're soluble in alcohol. They're not terribly soluble in oil. So they're not going to show up in a salve or a body oil, right? With this plant, you really do. You want water. It likes water. The primary chemistry that we really love is water-loving chemistry. Yeah. So what else about plantain? So that combination of that astringent and moistening quality, we can think of the different tissues that are responsive to that. One of the primary ones also is the bladder, right? The bladder needs to hold moisture. It needs to hold urine. It needs to protect itself. We used to think that urine is sterile, but there's no sterile part of the body. The body isn't a sterile. We're covered in organisms, and that's part of our health and part of our strength, right? So we don't want to equate the sterility with health. That has been a big part of our healthcare problem in our dominant culture. But I don't remember where I was going with that. It was just a little rant. But so the sterility of urine. Oh, because people are always saying, oh, well, pee on it because urine is sterile. So it does have a lower amount of bacteria, but it still is from our body. So the urinary bladder is sometimes when it is very, very reactive, when we have chronic urinary tract infections, chronic bladder infections, cystitis. And we often see this in elders as estrogen levels drop in bodies. Estrogen holds moisture and tissues stop being able to hold moisture as effectively because it doesn't have as much estrogen. So we can develop a lot of dryness and fragility of tissues. And that can show up in the bladder. It can show up in the vaginal canal. And so plantain can be really, really helpful as a tea to just help to kind of bring a little bit more moisture and tonification to those tissues. If they're really dry and irritable and reactive, people who constantly have a bladder infection, and that bladder infection, when they pee, it's hot and burning, right? Because this is a cooling and moistening plant. So this wouldn't be as effective if they have a urinary tract infection where they feel like they can't urinate and it's just, they're bloated and it's there's white mucus and there's just kind of a lot of stagnation, right? This maybe wouldn't be the one we would use for that. Well, dry, hot, inflamed, irritated tissues where you want that cooling, moistening feeling that you felt in your mouth. I want to astringe that tissue. I want to calm it down, put a little bit of moisture on there, right? So we can think of that pattern, think of that tissue pattern and where it applies in the body. And you can start to see all the different ways that we can use plantain. Same with eye washes and sinus washes. You can use plantain very, very effectively if you have allergies, right? People with airborne allergies, it's a big problem right now because there's so many things that have bloomed from all of the rains. There's a lot of new and different and more pollens that people are responding to. So a lot of people are having that drippy eyes, sinuses that are just congested. They're just drippy and congested. Well, that drippiness is tissue that is leaky, right? It's not strong, healthy, closed tissue. It's tissue that's just kind of leaking stuff. So we use an astringent plant to tighten those tissues up because that's how they need to be, but they also need to be moist. So we can make a tea from plantain, just like we're using now. Add a little bit of salt to it. So whenever we're using things as a wash for mucous membranes, if we're using it as an eye wash or a sinus wash, we always want to have a saline solution. We want to have salt in there because otherwise it's going to burn and it's not going to be healthy for your eyes. Your eyes, tears are salty, blood is salty, sweat is salty, our body is salty, and so we need that saltiness that's going to protect our tissues. So if you make a saline solution of 1/4 teaspoon of salt in 8 ounces of liquid. So it can be water that's been boiled, or it can be a tea. You can make plantain tea, 8 ounces of plantain tea and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. This makes what's called an isotonic solution. This one is 0.9% saline. You can ignore the chemistry language if you're like, ugh, that makes me twitchy, I don't like that. You totally don't have to learn this, but some brains like it, some brains don't. It's here for you, and then you feel for you're not going to be tested for it or anything. But an isotonic solution means that the balance of salt inside and outside the body is the same, right? So this is the exact salinity of tears. If you increase that, if you put more salt in there, say you increase it to 1/2 teaspoon of salt, or you're someone who's like, I don't measure the salt, I just pour the salt in. Right? I just pour some salt in and do it, which is exactly how I do it. What you're making is a hypertonic. Okay, iso means equal, hyper means more. Hypertonic, you're increasing the saline. And the thing to remember about salt and water is that water follows salt. So wherever the salt is more, water is going to go to that place because water follows salt. They like to be balanced. So if you have a hypertonic, a very salty solution that you're rinsing your sinuses with, if your sinuses are really have so much fluid in there, right? Your face just feels congested and stagnant and it's just swollen. There's so much fluid and it's not going anywhere. We use a hypertonic solution, especially with something like plantain. And because there's more salt in the water outside your sinuses than inside your sinuses, it's going to draw the fluid out of your cells and into the water. That's what a hypertonic solution does. So it's going to pull water out of the tissues. So we use that, or if your eyeballs are really swollen, right? You have allergies and they're just big old tomatoes. We can use a hypertonic, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt instead of 1/4 teaspoon in water, and use that as an eye wash, and it's going to draw that moisture out of the eyes because there's more salt in the water than there is in the liquid inside the eyes. Does that make sense? So, so you can increase that salt. Just think about what's happening. What do I want to happen to this skin here, this tissue here? I see that the tissue is not really happy. Do I want to just kind of soothe it and bathe it? I can use an isotonic. Do I really want to pull some of that water? There's too much fluid in those tissues. We can make it hypertonic. Right?
Did you recommend a high alkaline water?
No. So the salt is going to make it alkaline, right? Because salt is a mineral, and so it's going to change the alkalinity there. But our tissues really, our external tissues really like to be slightly acidic. And so when we use alkaline water topically on the body, skin can become kind of itchy and irritated. It makes all of those organisms, all of those bacteria that live on the outside of our body, they're like, oh, we just got it acidic. We got it right where we like it to be. It likes to be just slightly acidic. And then we put alkalinity in our skin, and it makes our skin have to work better and work again to change that acidity. And during that time where we've changed that alkalinity of the skin, our skin isn't protected. Right? So it takes a little bit of time, and sometimes our skin starts to just kind of become unprotected all the time because our skin we're just constantly alkaline. That's why hard water is not so good for our skin because it is alkaline and it tends to dry the skin off. And that's why it's a nice thing to do a like an apple cider vinegar rinse after your shower. And just put a little bit of apple cider vinegar in a cup and fill it with water and dump that over your body and change that acidity of your skin to a more acidic skin. That's not a plantain. To make it plantain, you can make tea of plantain. That actually would be really good. Or you could infuse plantain into apple cider vinegar. Make a vinegar extract of plantain and use that as an after water wash. That would actually be really good. If you had itchy, irritated, red, dry, kind of reactive skin, that would be an awesome skin treatment thing. Let's see. There are immunostabilizing compounds actions from these also. So plantain might have this kind of preliminary information, but the research, if you look up apigenin and luteolin, there's so much research on these compounds. They're just really, really, really fascinating to see the research on these. But largely, I mean, they're flavonoids. They're going to be antioxidant. They're going to be anti-inflammatory. They're going to stabilize tissues. They're going to fight cancer. It's what they do, and they're in a lot of plants. But they're really, really cool, and they do tend to be high here. One of the other newer areas of research is that they seem to be regulating for conditions of autoimmunity. So in autoimmune conditions, things like rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis, lupus, we have immune cells that have identified parts of the body as pathogens, as invaders, and they create an antibody, right? Immune cells produce antibodies to fight against something coming in, right? So we have a virus and the immune system goes, I know you, mount up and we're going to go kill that, right? Well, the body will start to do that to its own tissues because the immune system is dysregulated. And so it might see the what's called the myelin sheath, the protective layer around the nerves, right? The immune system can develop an antibody against that, and that causes multiple sclerosis. That causes damage to that myelin sheath and all of the neurological effects that come from that. So apigenin and luteolin may help to quiet down immune response in those people with autoimmune disorders. It's, again, preliminary research, but it's kind of really, really cool, and one of the reasons why they're looking at this so much. Apigenin, by the way, the highest amount of apigenin that you can get is in celery, the plants in the celery family, celery and carrots and parsley. The root name, apa, comes from the Apiaceae family, the parsley family. So eating all of those, chopping them up and throw them in your food is a really good thing to do because of those benefits. Let's see, any questions about plantain? Comments? How are you feeling?
As I drink this more, I get the sliminess.
Yeah.
Like the soft, moisturizing.
And as it sits more, you'll get more sliminess. Now, if I made this as an overnight extract, you would actually see a lot more slime. The flavonoids can pull out into water more rapidly than the mucilage can. So to make it the strongest, what you would do is make an overnight extraction. So put it into a jar, pour boiling water over it, put the lid on it, and leave it overnight. So you get that initial hot water, pulls things out, and then as the water cools, different things will pull out into cold water than pull out in hot water. And so mucilage is one of those things that likes to come out in cold water, but it likes to have the cell walls broken by the hot water. So I like that initial hot and then cool for something like plantain, really overnight, good stuff. And then finally, plantain for any kind of gastrointestinal irritation or inflammation, heartburn, reflux, ulcers, colitis, IBS, anything where the mucous membranes of the intestinal tract or the gastrointestinal tract are disrupted. Plantain is really, really effective for that, for all the reasons that we already talked about, right? You actually would know that because you know that it's going to make that combination tissue layer. It's going to reduce inflammation, regulate immune response, all of that. So always put it into any formula for healing of the gastrointestinal tract. But I wouldn't use it in a steam. All of that chemistry, all of that wonderful stuff that we've been talking about is primarily due to things that are large molecular weight. They're big, complex molecules, and those big, complex molecules can't be carried by steam. That's why when we breathed in the steam, you didn't feel slime, you didn't feel moistening on the mucous membranes. Well, you couldn't, because polysaccharides are big, large chains, and they're only kept in the water. You could boil that for a long time, and all that would happen was the concentration of those compounds that actually would be stronger and stronger and stronger in the water, because the steam isn't carrying any of that. So one of the important things about steam medicine is that steam can only carry really tiny molecules. And a lot of plant chemistry is really big molecules. You can't see chlorophyll in steam. You'll never see green steam. Chlorophyll is a big, large, complex molecule. So anything that the plant does, any therapeutic effects of the plant that have to do with chlorophyll are not going to be found in the steam. They can't be found in the steam because chlorophyll isn't in the steam. Chlorophyll is very strongly improves oxygen availability in tissues. It's detergent, it's deodorizing, incredibly valuable, but it's not in steam. Mucilage is not in steam. Minerals are not in steam. Distilled water is steam that is collected. Distilled water is made as distilled water to purify it, so it's not carrying anything, because it can't carry anything, because steam can only carry tiny little things. So go over that a lot, because there's a lot of people who are using steams therapeutically that will put plants like plantain in there, because you think about the chemistry. You know, we've been talking about how wonderful it is. It's moistening and it's tonifying. If you're using it, say, as a vaginal steam or a sinus steam or a face steam, you think, yeah, totally makes sense. Thinking about how plantain is used for healing the skin. Oh, that's so good. Yes, but none of that chemistry is in the steam. It's all in the water. If you do a compress, you do a soak, you do a bath, sitz baths. Oh yes, a sitz bath for vaginal health, or for hemorrhoids, or a compress or a soak for the skin. That's where you're going to see the healing effects of plantain, right? And that's true for a lot of plants. So lots of misinformation and bad chemistry in steaming these days. That being said, there are different ways to be in relationship with a plant. And sometimes a steam or any type of work that you're doing may be an infused oil, right? You're making that steam or you're making that infused oil for a different reason. You're not making it for chemistry. You're making it to be in relationship with that plant. You're using it for something else. I don't know. It's not my relationship. It's your relationship. But if you feel like, no, I really want to be in relationship with this plant as steam, because steam is an important part of the work that I do with plants, and I want to do that, that's fine. Don't assign chemical, scientific, therapeutic effects to what's going on there, because that's not what's going on there, but it doesn't mean that that isn't meaningful. And it doesn't mean that that's not important in healing. You just have to kind of clarify what you mean by healing in terms of, so that you give accurate, complete information. We always want to have accurate information. And also soaks and baths. Soaks and baths are so big. Steams are all like, oh, everyone's all into steam, but ain't nothing like a bath. Just drop it all into a bath and just let it soak. You get right in contact with all of that stuff. So good. Right. Okay. Sickness said, oh, Des. Hi, Des. I'm a huge fan of sea salt soak for wounds. Totally. Yes. Salt water. I'm just a huge fan of salt. Yes. My number one ingredient for leaky gut teas. So yeah, Des is a brilliant herbalist. yeah, for a leaky gut, exactly, for reducing that down. Steams and essential oils, they carry terpenes, but what else? For so many essential oil medicinal claims, they list the medicinal effects of the whole plant, and that's not accurate. Exactly, whenever you're using a part of the plant, you're only getting medicine of a part of the plant. So yeah, very important. All right, so that's Plantain. Go out and introduce yourself to Plantain out here if you want. If you want to take home a plantain plant, I have a lot of plantain. I'll dig up some plantain and give it to you because those seeds, once it gets established, it's established everywhere. Harvesting plantain, you also should harvest plantain. What was the component from the celery? These apigenin and luteolin, these flavones. Apigenin and luteolin. Bicolin isn't in there, but these ones are. I'll just be over here so Des can write that down. What was I going to say? I was going to say yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when I work with medicine, I like to also layer it in the spiritual aspect.
Yes.
Well. Is there anything that Plantain encourages spiritually?
Yeah. So I like working with plants spiritually and magically in relationship to their chemistry and medicine, because I think that's so often how they're informed, right? We see a lot of plants that are really strong antimicrobials. They have all those terpenes, those aromatic terpenes that are really strongly antimicrobial. And they have a lot of flavonoid chemistry for structural integrity, and they're used for protection, right? Protection against harmful influences. It's like, yeah, someone saw that plant and said, wow, this protects me against harmful influences as pathogens, airborne pathogens, but also, gosh, yeah, people can be really pathogenic, right? And energies can be pathogenic. Yarrow is a perfect plant for that. Yarrow is one of our other primary first aid plants. Boil heals wounds. It shuts down barriers. It makes blood go where it needs to. It makes tissues just kind of shut down, and it's a very good barrier for psychic stuff. It's like, no, your shit does not affect me. Nope, nope, nope. We have yarrow growing in front of our shop for just that reason. It's like, nope, it is our barrier, right? So I like to look. So one answer is I like to look at the plant and ask them, what is the medicine that you hold? What can you teach me about making good barriers, about keeping those boundaries closed, about balancing that tonification with juiciness, right? That juiciness is necessary, that it is that balance of being strong, but also having that layer of moisture over that, right? So what does it tell us about being abundant and throwing your seeds everywhere so that you can you can be everywhere? Because plantain is a weed. That's what I was going to say. It's a weed. And so if you want to go out harvesting, you want to forage for plantain, you can forage for plantain because it grows everywhere, but realize that your municipality acknowledges it as a weed, as a problematic weed. And so they spray this. And it's going to grow back because look at those seeds. There's billions of seeds. You cannot win in the battle against plantain, but they're going to try. So when you see plantain growing somewhere, quite often realize there may be a lot of pesticide residue in the soil, even if you don't see it. But especially if you see, there was a place that there was plantain, you're like, oh, I'm going to go check that out a couple of weeks later. And you go by and there's like a line of dead plants. A line of dead plants. That is, they just sprayed there. Do not look there. So you just want to be aware. It's a weed, and people have different relationships with weeds than herbalists do. A lot of herbalists love weeds. We love dandelions. We love plantain. We love nettles. And those are the very things that some people are trying to kill off. So just be mindful of that. I draw the combination of science and magic. I mean, science is magic, exactly. It's stuff that we don't understand. And you can ask some organic farms if you can come weed for them. That's a great idea. Yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Brilliant woman, I love you. All right, so yeah, that was one of the things that I wanted to point out. Alrighty, so there you go. There's plantain for you. Go find some, and even if you're like not sure that it's going to be great to drink, you just kind of be around it and say, "Hey, I see you." You know, if you want to be, if you want to be chaotic, because yay chaos, you can grab some of the seeds of plantain and just go kind of throwing it everywhere, right? But chaos isn't always helpful. Realize that that may cause some landlord to spray there, right? So maybe if you're throwing it somewhere, just think of the ramifications of, hey, this is what I'm doing, because now I'm guilty. I totally throw, or past tense, I would make little seed balls of plantain and just throw them into vacant lots and everywhere. So just grow, babies, grow. There are all of our actions have ramifications, and we just kind of want to see, okay, this feels good at the time. What are the long-term effects of if I do this, right? Because that's also true. All right. All right. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Good to see you all. Mwah. And I will see you next week. Okay, bye.
I was gonna buy something next door.